Hello? 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 I apologize. My wife has to pick up my daughter at 1, and our car's not starting. So I'm trying to problem solve that. So petroleum jellies, neither petroleum nor jelly. Discuss. So no, just I'll start class in just a second as soon as I figure this out. Which way? That's funny. Yeah. Maybe like the ground jump or something. It'll be wet. All right. So there's a couple of things. We'll bring that up in just a second. I did pass out this larger handout. Did I not? Okay, great. So. Thank you. So much of that stuff you see there is may seem familiar or look familiar. It's pretty classic for a number of the workshops that I run, that I use some similar principles in those sessions. So I need to make one more copy, and I'll do that in just a second. But what I wanted to primarily have us concentrate on is, first of all, how was the 4-day weekend? Yeah. So yesterday I had I'm working with Eastern Carver County Schools, and they had a meeting, and they needed me to attend, and so it was easier to instead of breaking up the lecture, just have you watch that film and have some conversations about that. They're trying to break the class up into small segments. So I hope you found that break enjoyable, as well as an opportunity to view that film. And we'll talk a little bit about it in terms of what stood out for you. I know some folks didn't get a chance to look at that. And I know some as a result, folks have concern about the quiz and whatnot. So I'm a very reasonable and rational person. So we will we'll deal with that or manage that as a part of today's lecture. So again, my job isn't to trick or to whatever. So we're gonna keep on rolling. So one of the first things that I wanted to talk about is, and you'll see it on your handout, is first of all, we talked about the human soul, and that's the body and the spirit and its connection, and that these forms of oppression are designed to kind of pull those things apart or drive a wedge between those two. In letter D, how have we defined this idea of diversity, or what have we said that diversity is? So how do we define diversity? In what ways have we defined diversity? Yes.
So like one group that has many different qualities or characteristics within it.
Okay, one group that has very many qualities or characteristics within it. When we look at that diagram right at letter D, what does that diagram suggest to us about this idea of what diversity is? What do you notice, or what do you recognize about that particular diagram? Yes.
There is a likeness and differences.
That there are likenesses and differences. And so one of the ways that we use, particularly in this class, to talk about diversity is that it is an honoring and acknowledging our commonalities and what? Differences. As stated before, oftentimes people pay attention to one aspect or the other, but never both simultaneously, right? So it is our commonalities and our differences at the same time, which actually leads us to a place that will not allow us to be colorblind. Now, often colorblindness is seen as the pinnacle of human achievement, right? I mean, like going to the moon or hitting a home run. If you can be colorblind, you have been successful. What is problematic about the concept of being colorblind? What's problematic with that? Yes.
Not necessarily honoring the differences.
So you're not honoring the differences, right? And if you're not honoring the differences, you oftentimes also can't acknowledge the commonalities, right? So so it is that balance of both of those. We are both very much alike, but also very much different. So diversity is the accounting and acknowledging of both commonalities and differences. So I would suggest that color blindness is not the pinnacle of human intellectual achievement as it regards to race and social commentaries, but actually this idea of being culturally conscious or being color conscious, recognizing that differences aren't bad. It's just the values in the ways that we associate those differences that can become quasi so-called bad, right? And so, so diversity. Right at letter E is this idea of equity and equality. So what does that diagram at letter E suggest to us about equity and equality?
That everything equal
for everybody may not suit their needs.
Okay, so everything equal for everyone may not suit their needs. What else does that diagram suggest? Yes.
Equity is a lot different than equality.
That equity is a lot different than equality. And I would go as far as to say that equity, that equity is so far different, but related to equality. And I would say that equality is fair. That equality is fair. Everybody gets something, right? On soccer teams, when you're a little kid or whatever, anybody ever play on a team where everybody got a ribbon or everybody got a trophy, or that is fair. That's equality. Everybody gets something. However, what have your parents taught you or said to you as you've gone to use that fair card because there was something that you wanted, they were holding you back from, or something that somebody else had that you wanted, or you were having an argument with a sibling, and you used that fair card? How did that go? They said life is not fair. What did they mean by that?
There's always winners and losers.
There's winners and losers. What else did they mean by that? You don't always get what you deserve. Sometimes you don't even get what you work for, right? I mean, look at there are tons of stories in the Bible where people worked 7 years to get a wife, and then they got the wife, got the tent, was like, wait a minute, that's not the right one. They said, oh, if you want the right one, so let's work for another 7 years till you get the one that you want, right? I mean, so sometimes you just don't get what you want. Life's not fair. It's not fair. Sometimes you fall in love with somebody who's not in love with you. Not fair. Sometimes you spend a long time in a line to get a delicious dinner only to discover that it's disgusting. That everybody else likes it, but you don't like it. It's not fair that you did that. Right? So life's not fair. And so what we have to recognize is that equity is helping people get what they need, even though it may not be fair. Anyone have a coach, either K-12 or even now? Ever had a coach? Yeah. So did the coach ever have to spend extra time with a member of the team to get them to either learn something or to accept a concept? Did the coach ever do that? Right? Was that fair to the rest of the team? That he took that time away to spend with this one person so they could get their move or their blocking scheme or their position. Was it fair to the team that he took the time away to give them extra special attention?
Depends.
Depends.
Say, like, it could benefit the team as a whole to get that one player on the same page instead of letting that one player struggle.
Right? So when we talk about this idea of equity, it's not just the individual, but also how that individual fits within the larger scheme, the larger team. Right? So equality is sameness, making sure everyone has the same opportunities, the same chances. Equity is about the outcome. What is the outcome of those same opportunities, right? So the same outcome of those opportunities. And these two concepts are going to come up again today, in particularly as we look at our next film, right? So equity and equality. What I also want to suggest is if we go down to the next block, which is letter G, we can skip down to G. And there are 3 words that are important for us to talk about because oftentimes they get used synonymously, right? Or they get used in place of each other, when in fact they are not the same, they're not the same word. So based on that is this thing called behavioral cognitive and native, right? Therapy, cognitive behavior therapy. And what cognitive behavior therapy, what might you suggest, or what might you think, just looking at the title of this type of therapy, what might be suggested by the words used in this therapy? Cognitive behavioral therapy, or behavior cognitive therapy. They're interchangeable, yes.
Thoughts determine actions.
That thoughts in turn determine actions, right? And so in cognitive behavior therapy or behavior cognitive therapy, what they suggest is that emotions plus thoughts, and I would say emotions and attitudes, thoughts and beliefs, dictate behaviors. So emotions plus thoughts dictate behaviors. So when we look at these three words, I'll give you one way to think about this. And one way to think is that discrimination is about a pattern of behaviors. And what did the 1964 Civil Rights Act do or say about discrimination? Anyone? That it's illegal to what? Yeah, there's a list of 7. There's a list of 7, and I think they're trying to add some more, but there's a list of 7 criteria that the 1964 Civil Rights Act says is illegal to do that. So discrimination was defined and outlawed by the Civil Rights Act, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, right? So outlawed and defined. And it is a set of behaviors, right? It is a set of behaviors, which means what? What does that mean, that it's a set of behaviors?
Choices.
So it's a set of choices, okay? Why behaviors? Yes.
Well, behaviors can be changed.
So behaviors can be changed. All right, I'm going to thrust into this one too. So let's do this. So let's first look at these two words, intent and impact, and we'll talk about how they are organized here in just a second. But with intention, how can you measure someone's intention? What are the ways you can measure someone's intention? How does intention get measured? Yes.
Isn't it really only if they like tell you?
It's only if they tell you what their intentions are, right? But then how do you measure that, right? So they can tell you, I can tell you what my intentions are. So I intend to pay you $5 tomorrow.
Action, your action.
So the measurement is the action. But if I don't give you $5 tomorrow, I still had the intention of doing it. I intended to do it. Can we hold people to their intentions? Are intentions measurable? I would suggest not, right? But what we actually do measure is the impact. We can measure impact. So, yeah, we may as well just make this an amalgam. No, I won't do that yet. But we will amalgamate those. So I can't measure intent, but I can measure impact. And what discrimination says is that there are behaviors that cause a particular impact that we've created these laws around. So these laws that behaviors are our measure of impact. So we can do that. So if I'm discriminated against and someone has violated my civil or human rights, how do I get that rectified? How does it get fixed? How does that get fixed? If someone's violated my human or civil rights, how do we fix that? How does it get fixed? How does the harm get repaired? What institutions engage in repairing that, making it right, reconciling it? So you're walking down the hall, and it's between classes, and people are laughing and joking, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, someone that you don't know swats you in the behind and squeezes. Is there a problem? Is there a problem? Yeah. Well, what is the problem called?
Harassment.
Harassment. And depending on how far someone wants to take it, they can say that it's also sexual assault. I mean, they could go that particular direction, right? In the most benign case, it would be called harassment, sexual harassment, or sexual assault. Right? What is the remedy? What would be the next step for someone who has been violated in that way? What is their next course of action, or what is next course of action is available to them?
Go to the courts.
What's that?
Go to the courts.
Ultimately go to the courts. But how do we even get to the courts? I make a report, right? I make a report either with security, or I find an administrator or a teacher, or a professor, they make a report, and this process starts rolling, right? If I'm out in the world, in the world of work, and it happens at my job, I report that to whom? To HR, human resources, right? And so then they do an investigation, they start this ball rolling, and if I'm not satisfied with either what the school comes up with or what my workplace comes up with, what is also at my disposal? What can I do? What's that? Yeah, I get my attorneys, and we sue the school, we sue the company, and if the state was negligent in hearing our claim, we can sue them too. And finally, who has the final say on how this gets remedied? A judge. A judge. Right? And in the most extreme cases, it's the Supreme Court of the United States. They will pass down a judgment. And that person, because this is a civil case and not a criminal case, they will give them a fine of some sort. They will have to pay or make some kind of restitution. If in the cases of sexual assault, that takes it into a whole nother realm, which now makes it criminal. So then there's a whole nother way that whole thing turns out, right? So the courts define and establish what this discrimination is. So sometimes you'll hear people say, I've been discriminated against, and that's actually not appropriate for their particular situation. They may feel as though discrimination has happened, but it has not reached the threshold of breaking their civil or their civil rights or their human rights, right? So something to think about. So then what does this definition of discrimination lead us to or suggest about the two previous words? So what is bigotry? Bigotry is an emotion. And oftentimes what people have done is they've misdiagnosed bigotry and said that it is a lack of knowledge, that people are ignorant. Has anyone ever heard someone say that? That bigoted person is ignorant. When in fact, that's a miscalculation or a misdiagnosis of the bigot. Because before I came to this knowledge, when I encountered bigots, I went with the idea that they were ignorant. And so I would bring information, I'd bring knowledge, I'd bring statistics. And the more stuff I brought to the bigot, how did they respond to that information?
Are they defensive?
They were extremely defensive, right? How else would they respond?
Discredited.
They would try to discredit everything that I say because every argument I had, they had another argument, right? And if I happened to overwhelm them with the body of knowledge that I have, they would say this, which led me to understand what their issue was. They would say, Andre, I don't care what you say. This is how I feel. Oh. Bigotry is an emotional state. So how do you change emotions? How do you change emotions? Anyone ever had a sad friend? Not clinical depression, I'm saying just the blues, right? They're down about something, they're sad about something. How did you get them out of that? Did you bring over a PowerPoint presentation or Excel spreadsheet and said, these are all the reasons that you should not be sad? Is that what you did? No, what'd you do with them?
Empathize.
You empathize with them. And so how did they know that you were empathizing?
By taking an interest and trying to see how they feel and try to connect on that level.
Yeah, you connect with them. Right? You empathize. You bake cookies. You take them out. You say, let's go here, or let's go do their favorite thing. In some cases, you just sit and listen to them. Used to drive me crazy when I would get the blues, and my sister would bring her kids over. I'm like, don't bring those kids over. I'm trying to be sad here, right? And why did bringing those kids over disrupt my sadness? Yeah, because they're kids. They make me happy. They're happy, and it rubs off. And then before I know it, I'm like, oh, I was trying to be sad, but now I can't, right? I would suggest the same thing about bigots, that bigotry is an emotional state. So am I saying that, well, what do you think I'm suggesting when I say it? When I say those things? What am I suggesting about
It could change.
that what?
It could change.
That they can change? Yeah, bigots can change.
Of emotions.
Emotions change all the time, right? Think about your first crush. Are you still crushing on them now? More than likely not. Some of y'all are like, yes, I am. I'm just teasing, right? But no, so this idea of bigotry is an emotional state and it can change, right? I can't tell you the countless number of stories that I know about people who were not in favor of interracial relationships and probably still aren't in favor of those. But when the grandchild shows up, it's a whole nother ballgame, right? And they love that grandchild, even though they didn't like how they came, right? But they love that grandchild. How is that? There's a connection. They've been able to build a connection and see some relationships. And I would say that oftentimes good people like us cut off bigots as opposed to actually leaning in and trying to build those build collaborations with them or to help them. Because what do good people say about bigots? Good people. What do they say about bigots? Or what's a common thought of good people have about bigots?
They're irrational.
That they're irrational. That they're irrational. What else?
It might make them angry.
That we might make them angry. All right. Does anyone have a family member that tells politically incorrect jokes? I know I do. Right? Do you have family members that are maybe socially awkward in some really uncomfortable ways? Right? Do you have any folks like that in your family that are okay? All right, cool. Just the three of us. We're the only real ones up here. We must be woke. Right? Did I use that right? Okay, cool. Just don't be throwing me no shade, so I don't have the gloves to catch it. Was that good or no? Is that Army bars? No. Oh, okay. Well, you know, I'm an old cat, right? So at any rate, so one of the things. So here's a couple of things to keep in mind, particularly working with bigots. Is so I know that my parents, particularly my parents were pastors. So with some of our relatives, my dad would be like, yeah, you can't hang around those people. If they're going to be at the family gathering, we're not going. Right. Because he couldn't take all the stuff. And I wonder, and I see it now, I see the result of that now. And when you've had either parents or loved ones who say that about other people in your family, do those people get better because of the people who told you to stay away from them's absence? Do they get better because the good people are staying away from them? I would say no. I would also say because we're social creatures, that they will, if they're cut off from this group, they'll go find a group that agrees with all their ideas, and then they start breeding more ideas, right? But there's a reason why people don't try to work with the bigots. And one of the two reasons that I'll address is that I believe that people are nervous that the bigoted person might have a point.
Like people are afraid to agree with them.
They're not only are they afraid to agree with them, but they're afraid that they might agree with them. So this is what one of the things that I tell, parents or in conversations that we have. Well, Uncle Jim's going to be at that party and he's going to influence my son. Okay, first of all, how long is this party? How long is the party?
2, 3 hours.
2, 3 hours, okay. How long is Uncle Jim going to be interacting with your child at this party? Probably 30 minutes, maybe an hour, maybe, I don't know. Right? So, Uncle Jim's 35 to 45 minutes, or let's even give it an hour of time with your kid can undo the lifetime you spent growing this young person. Uncle Jim can undo it in 1 hour. I might want to question my parenting skills, right? The other thing that we also have to recognize is that sometimes we keep people around us, or we hang around people who we're afraid to align ourselves with, because what they do is not good or not respectable, or we're too embarrassed or afraid to do it ourselves, but we revel in the relationship we have with them because they can do it. And we live vicariously through them. So those are some of the reasons that bigoted people don't challenge the bigoted folks. And so what I would also suggest, the last thing I'll say about this, is that what I'm not saying about being around a bigot is that you have to take disrespect. I'm not saying you have to take disrespect. I'm not saying that you have to put yourself in harm's way to try to help this person. What I am suggesting is that you create tethers and boundaries with these folks, but to tell them you're never going to let them go. So I have 2 Great Danes. I love my Great Danes. Benson and Ozzy. Original name was Zoe, but I have a niece named Zoe that just got weird, so we just changed to Ozzy, right? So Benson and Ozzy. So Ozzy at the head is about that tall. Benson's a little shorter, but he's like wider. He's chunkier, right? So when I'm walking these guys, I have them on the tether. And when there's nobody around and we're just kind of on the street by ourselves, no cars or nothing, the tether is really long, right? So they can just, wander around and do their thing. But because I have Great Danes and people have thoughts about Great Danes, people have fears about Great Danes, and I don't know what other people's dogs will do with my Great Danes, because I trust my dogs because I know them. But I don't know other people's dogs, and so therefore I don't trust them. What do I do when I start to see people or see other dogs coming around? What do I do with that tether? I tighten it. Why? So I have greater control over what my dog does. Now, what I'm not suggesting is that human beings are dogs. I'm not trying to make that correlation. But I do want to paint that word picture for you so that you can understand what our responsibility is to the bigots. And I'll tell you more why we have that responsibility in just a second, but you may already start to be able to calculate that as we finish this model. And then nextly is this idea of prejudice. And what is prejudice? So if bigotry is an emotional state and discrimination is about behaviors, what is prejudice? It is thoughts, right? This idea of thoughts and models, right? These frozen thoughts, these frozen models that are stuck in a context that is not current, right? Because what do we know about context? It's constantly what? It's constantly changing. But sometimes our models and our thoughts don't change with the context. So how do you help someone change their thoughts or their thinkings or examine their models? How effective is preaching someone to their models, to examine their model? How well does that do necessarily, particularly outside of a religious context? It doesn't do very well at all, right? So I'll let you in on a secret of working with young people. I no longer ask young people questions. I don't talk to them. Well, actually, I don't talk to them. I do ask them questions. But I don't talk to them because they usually don't talk back. They either have earbuds in or their thumbs are doing something with their thing, playing their DS9 or whatever it is, DS3D, whatever. And they're doing all this stuff. But I ask Socratic questions. I ask Socratic questions. Or if I'm really feeling, full of myself, I'll ask rhetorical questions. Right? And so why do I then go to asking questions as opposed to making statements?
That makes them engaged.
It engages them. Even if what?
They don't want to.
They don't want to be engaged. Even if they don't want to be engaged, they get engaged. So ultimately they say, Andre, just stop asking me so many questions. Stop asking me questions. Oh, you did hear me. You did hear me. And what is the point of my questions? Are my questions being asked just to annoy them? Possibly. But what is the thrust of the questions that I'm asking? What am I trying to create with those questions? Connections, relationships, cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance. And what is cognitive dissonance? What is cognitive dissonance?
Is it like tension in your mind about something that, like, you hear something that doesn't go on with what you thought it was?
Yeah. The world in my mind and the world outside of me there's something different about those. And so my mind then has to rectify that. It tries to problem solve that. And that's where we want people, so-called prejudiced people, to be. Because what we know is that they have these frozen thoughts and these frozen models that they're not thinking. And so, and it's funny because you'll be around, or at least I've been around some of my relatives, and they'll make a statement, and I'll say, "Well, where did you get that?" Right? And then, "Well, I heard it at the barber shop." Oh, okay, right? Because we know the barbershop is, as good as Wikipedia, right? So there's that. Or they'll make a statement and you say, well, is there another news station that has a different point of view around that? Well, I don't know. I don't listen to another station. Oh. Is there another magazine? Are there other authors that have written on blah, blah, blah? And the funny thing is, the more questions you start asking this prejudiced person, they start breaking down. They're like, oh, does not compute. And either they recognize that and move on and say, you know what, I need to change my thinking, or they back into something that they would never say that they are, and they back into this emotional thing. Right? Like, no, I'm not racist. I'm not racist. Oh, okay. But when we look at the impact of your behaviors, certainly points to racism, right? It points to being prejudiced. It points to being bigotry, being a bigot. So those are important things to realize. Who has said that they will deal with people's behaviors? What entity said that it will deal with people's behaviors?
Congress?
Congress, justice, yeah. The law. Right? So the law says it will deal with people's behavior. Is there a law that says how or that dictates or limits the emotions I can have? No, there is no law that says what emotions I can have. Is there a law that says or limits or explains what thoughts I can have? There is no law that says what thoughts I can have. So if the law says it will do its part, which is to take care of people's behaviors and eliminate and address discrimination, whose responsibility is it to take care of bigotry and prejudice? Say it loud, so because everybody didn't hear it.
Myself or me?
Yeah.
Yourself.
As individuals, it is our responsibility to address bigotry and prejudice. And when we don't, people take that as acceptance. They take it as acceptance. So, having said that, when we go back to look at our quiz, this is the lens that I want you to look at as I reset the quiz. All right? And there are also some questions that came directly out of the film. And so I'll reset the quiz so that people who saw the film can now answer them with having the film in mind. All right? Does that make sense? All right. Is that fair to do so? Cool. Yes,
If
it was
we took
yeah.
the quiz, do we change our answers then or keep the answers right?
No, you don't have to change. You only have to change your answers if they need to be changed. Right? So if your answers need to be changed, do so. If not, they don't need to be changed. All right. Cool. So there is that. Oh yeah, this was yes, right on time. Can you take one, pass it back this way? Yes, I'll take that. Pass it back.
Good. Team over.
So we defined diversity, we talked about equity. The next thing I wanted to talk about was this idea of inclusion. Do it over here. So so looking at that letter E, you saw those two pictures of the boxes, and then the last one said liberation. But one thing I would offer you, another way to think about that in terms of liberation, is thinking about it as being inclusion, or you can even write the word inclusion under that or next to it. But this idea of inclusion is, well, what do you recognize about that third picture?
And knock down all the barriers.
They knock down all the barriers, right? So what might be a suggestion, or what might we be suggesting when we talk about this idea of inclusion? Yeah.
Instead of like ways of like how to deal with the problem, it's fixing the problem.
So instead of figuring out ways to deal with the problem, we actually fix the problem. That's a novel idea, right? We just fix these problems. What else? What else is suggested by that third diagram?
Instead of letting people watch things, or I guess be a bystander, we let them participate.
So possibly letting people to participate, right? Yeah. And I would go as far as to say that we eliminate unnecessary barriers. I am not an anarchist by any means. I do not want to live in an anarchist society where there is no law. So we need laws. We need boundaries. We need things that keep us safe. I believe we need police officers, right? So people are mad about things that police officers are doing, and I'm mad about it too. But I'm still calling them. I will still call them. Because I believe that the majority of them are doing what they're supposed to do, right? So I'm not an anarchist, and so I want us to really focus on this idea that inclusion is eliminating unnecessary barriers. Eliminating unnecessary barriers. So I was just watching a Teacher of the Year recipient, and I saw her talk about it, and it brought me to tears because I felt very much the same way. Brought me to tears because she was talking about her zero tolerance policy in her school. Anybody know what that is? Are you familiar with zero tolerance? Yeah. What's the basic concept?
Well, if it's just for drugs or alcohol, it's like you can't have any, be caught with any of it, but it could be for other things too.
Yeah, but you can't have any of it. And what else? Because it's not just not having it, yes.
If you do, you get kicked out.
If you do, you get kicked out. Just zero tolerance. Boom, we're not having it, right? So part of some of what school discipline also does is, and I think I shared this probably the first week of class, was that I don't get into power struggles with kids. Because as a teacher, I have all the what? I have all the power. So I don't get into power struggles. I did, and every time I did, I realized I was handing my power over to the kid to make me look goofy, right? But sometimes, particularly with these zero tolerance policies, you have a kid from an urban area and they got swag and attitude. What can that swag and attitude also be seen as? A threat, aggression. And so in a number of these zero tolerance atmospheres, well, he threatened me. I was threatened by him. He was angry and he was pacing. He threatened me. So I blah blah blah. And so kids get kicked out, right? That's a whole nother conversation on cultural competence and knowing your kids. But that's a whole nother conversation. So inclusion is about limiting those barriers. What is a bureaucrat? What is a bureaucrat? Or what is a bureaucracy, for that matter? You can look it up. You got smartphones right there in front of you. What is a bureaucrat or a bureaucracy? A bureaucrat or a bureaucracy. You guys said Google was smart.
System of government in which most of the important decisions are made by state officials rather than by elected representatives.
So read it one more time, just a little bit louder.
A system of government in which most of the important decisions are made by state officials rather than by elected representatives.
So what kind of, we live in a republic. We live in what is our system of governance called? Democracy, right? It's called a democracy. Do we live in a pure democracy? Do we?
No.
No. What do we live in? A what? No, we don't live in a bureaucracy. We live in a representative democracy. A democracy would suggest that all of us in this room make all the big decisions. Are we going to have pizza for lunch, or are we going to have Chinese for lunch, right? And you all get to decide and blah, blah, blah. And people are like, that sounds good. I was going to go take us over to that Mongolian walk right across the. Okay, anyway. So we allow our elected officials to represent us in our democracy, right? So we have a representative democracy. But the majority of decisions that are made about how things happen are made by bureaucrats. What else does anyone have a different definition of bureaucracy or bureaucrats? Because there's something very important to recognize about a bureaucrat versus an elected official.
Mine says that a bureaucrat is perceived as being concerned with procedural correctness at the expense of people's lives.
So who do elected officials work for? The people, right? Because they were elected by the people. Who do bureaucrats work for? Themselves. They actually work for themselves, right? They work at the leisure and at the pleasure of elected officials, but the policies and procedures that they create are designed to benefit them. So, and the other part about bureaucracies is that they're designed to slow down the dissemination of resources, right? So that we can ration those resources so that everyone can get something, right? So it's not all bad, right? So bureaucracies aren't all bad. So when we look at school policies around zero tolerance, who makes those up? So in some cases, it's the school board. Who carries them out? Who carries those things out on a day-to-day basis?
The administration and teachers.
What's that?
The administration and teachers.
The administration, teachers, they carry it out. Are they elected officials? No, they are bureaucrats operating within a bureaucracy, right? Are there sometimes ways, and you've seen this even in your own school, that there have been rules or policies that benefit the administration or the school to the detriment of the students? Have you seen any policies or procedures like that in your K-12 education, where it was good for the system, but it wasn't necessarily good for the students? Anybody have bizarre dress codes? There are a number of schools who are cracking down on natural hair. That students aren't allowed to, particularly African American students aren't allowed to either dread or twist or lock their hair, because that is it's against school policy. Okay. Is that a barrier?
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that increase inclusion? No, right? So as a matter of fact, it does quite the opposite. And so when we talk about this idea of inclusion, is what are there barriers in our systems that keep people from participating? A more common one that you might see or you might have noticed, particularly if you're applying for jobs, is the ban the box, right? So there's a movement to ban the box. And what the ban the box movement said is trying to build inclusion. It said that many people, as they're filling out their job applications, were being kicked out because they had and this is the interesting thing, they had some kind of criminal activity in on their record that they had to declare on the application. So what do you think employers were doing with those applications when they saw it? Throwing them out, and not asking when or how or what it was, but for fear people would tell them the truth, because if they didn't tell the truth and it came out later, they didn't want to be called a liar. So people were telling the truth. But some of those things were, for many people, there were things that happened either a long time ago, and so they've reformed and changed and paid their debt to society, or in some cases, there were things not even related to what they were seeking to do. And so, so there was a push, and we did this in Minnesota, to ban the box. Do people still have to declare their criminal status? Yeah, but much later in the process, when they can actually have a conversation with a person about what it was that they did, and not automatically tossed out. Because what is the so bureaucratically, that works out great, right? If you have a box on there and you got a criminal record, it works out great bureaucratically because I just toss it out, right? But does that actually give people who, again, paid their debt to society, corrected their behavior, changed who they are, does this give them an opportunity to demonstrate that and say that? No. So ban the box is an example of an inclusionary step that we've taken, right? So there are, so as you go to this other page here, I want you to think about a couple of things. So we've talked about diversity, we've talked about equity, we've talked about inclusion, and I want to talk a little bit about this idea of affirmative actions. Affirmative actions. And there are three categories that I want to pay attention to. So the first category is what I started talking about right up here, which is this idea of impact versus intent. Impact versus intent. So we've already talked about the fact that the law will take care of the impact. So let's say we go through all of this legal process, and we're going through this stuff, and the person who caused the harm, says, hey, I'm sorry, I was joking. You can't take a joke? I didn't mean it. Does that change, when we talk about this impact versus intent, does that change the proceedings?
No.
No, it doesn't change anything about the proceedings. So we don't. So the law has low to no tolerance for intent. It is looking at impact, right? Minnesota is a no-fault state. What does that mean if you get into a car accident? I love it how they twist words to mean actually the opposite of what they mean. But we're a no-fault state, which means what? You get into a car accident, whose fault is it? It's both your fault. You're both at fault. Now, the insurance companies have a whole other way of looking at that, and they'll figure out who hit who and who hit what. But as far as the state of Minnesota is concerned, that's why everybody has to have what? Car insurance, right? So the state of Minnesota says, if you are driving and you get into an accident, it is both your fault. It's weird that it's called a no-fault state, right? So it's both your fault. Why? What are they measuring? The impact. I would suggest that you cannot measure intent. You can measure the results of the intent, which is the impact. So if that person who swats you on the butt says, I apologize, I didn't, I was just joking, blah, blah, blah. That is now up to your discretion to forgive them or not to forgive them. But I will tell you that the legal proceedings will continue. Right? Will continue. So when we talk about these ideas of affirmative actions, we recognize that It is about discrimination. It is about legal resources like the NAACP or the ACLU. These are places that you can go to get legal aid. These are places that you can go to get help with discriminatory practices that you are encountering. And lastly, it's about goals and measures. Oftentimes people get this confused and they think that affirmative action is about quotas, right? And they actually tie it to this other thing, which I think is really interesting, which is reverse discrimination. Has anyone ever heard that before? Reverse discrimination. And what is that? What is reverse discrimination? Yes, please.
I think an example would be like, if you're like applying for a scholarship or like to get into a college or something, and say like the university wants to make it more diverse, and so they have like a quota for like certain ethnicities or whatever, which would like make it harder for a white student, for example, to get in because, say they want to help the last white students to make it more diverse or something like that, and so then that would be an example where you're discriminated against a certain kind of.
Okay, so white people being discriminated against is called reverse discrimination.
Well, it could be like one example.
As one example, okay. Other folks, have you heard that term used before? Anyone heard of Bigfoot? Who is Bigfoot?
He is this big hairy man that lives in the woods.
He's a big hairy man that lives in the woods. It sounds like my Uncle Jim, actually. Right, big hairy man that lives in the woods. Anyone heard of the I think Loch Ness Monster? Ever heard? Okay, so what's the Loch Ness Monster?
Sea creature.
Some kind of sea creature that lives somewhere. Is he in Canada? Where is he? In Ireland? I don't know where he is.
Yeah.
He's in where? In Scotland? Okay, he's in Scotland. All right. Anyone know of UFOs? Everybody seen a UFO? Okay. Yeah, I haven't met many people who have, but apparently there are a lot of people who do. Anyone believe in UFOs?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, couple. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Why would I bring up those other things in relationship to our conversation about reverse discrimination?
That doesn't exist. Discrimination is discrimination.
That in fact discrimination is discrimination, and that reverse discrimination does not exist, right? For a number of reasons. One is that we know that discrimination is a noun and it is a verb in both its form, right? So discrimination, to discriminate, is a noun and a verb. We cannot have reverse nouns or verb, although we do have antimatter. So we can have matter and we have antimatter. But reverse discrimination does not really exist. If it is occurring, then it should just be called discrimination. Reverse discrimination also, if we try to use that like with reverse racism, that's when a racist person is nice to people, right? That would be reverse. Okay, never mind. So it is discrimination. And oftentimes people talk about these quotas. And it's interesting that the example that was given was around scholarships, right? Was around scholarships. And one thing that I think is important for us to realize is that oftentimes we have the illusion of knowledge, right? So what are the programs that people say that discrimination is feeding through these so-called quotas. What's the program called? That is causing reverse discrimination. It's a hint. It's on your paper without an S. Affirmative action, right? So people say affirmative action. Okay, and what is affirmative action? Or how has it been defined to you? How have you heard it used?
Is it a law that? I'm not sure.
It's okay. A lot of people aren't for sure. So let's roll it out.
That just it prevents discriminatory based on the race or something.
Yep, so there's 7 categories: race, religion, creed, gender, genetic background, so whatever your genes are, and size and pregnancy. So it prevents that. And what does it encourage? That's what it stops. What does it encourage?
Diversity.
It's supposed to encourage diversity, right? Because one of the premises of affirmative action is that if this is a teeter-totter, that for a long time it was weighted with, kind of white people in mind. And so they say, well, if we do these affirmative actions, maybe we will even the playing field, right? But many folks feel like they are at a disadvantage because now it's weighted the other way. So what's one thing we know about trying to hit an equilibrium on a teeter-totter or on a fulcrum point? Easy or difficult task?
Difficult.
Pretty difficult task to hit an equilibrium, right? Or to some other folks like to use that idea of the pendulum swing, right? So, it swings one way, it swings the other way, blah, 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 blah. And so one of the ways that people like to talk about that is that there's a quota. And I will tell you that for affirmative action programs, there are not quotas. That quotas are actually illegal. Right? But we keep hearing people say quotas, which is interesting. So, but let's play a game. Let's play the game, what if there was a quota for affirmative action, right? So let's say I'm doing, I'm giving scholarships or I'm hiring for a position. How much of a quota or a holdback would be reasonable or would make sense for an employer to do, or a scholarship or a school to do? What percentage? 10%, 20%, 50%, 75%? What percentage would be acceptable or might one expect a university or a job or a foundation use as a quota if we're going to use that? What do you think makes sense?
What does that mean as a quota, like for how many people can get in? Or
So I didn't use the word quota, so what do people think that this word quota means? Is it how many people can get in? Is it how many people? What do you think that word quota means, or how have you heard people use it?
Fulfillment
Fulfillment of?
of like a task.
Okay.
Like it's always related to the number of something.
Okay. Mathematically, right. It's always related to the number of something or relationship, right? But in terms of looking at school admittance, jobs, scholarships, when people say that they have a quota, what do they have a quota for? I think that's your question, right? So what is the quota for? What does that mean?
Certain number of space.
Certain number of space allotted for what or to whom?
Students or in what context are we talking about?
Yeah, we're talking school, jobs, scholarships.
Just for, let's just grab it.
Just saying.
Like if it's a job, they have to hire so many people, and they have,
But that's just called hiring.
Do they like split the quotas, like they have to hire so many people of color and so many?
That's where quotas come in, because if we're just hiring people, we're just hiring people. But the word quota, when people start saying quota, what that becomes equivalent to is talking about who? People of color or women or minorities. We never say that we have a quota to hire 100% white people. Nobody ever talks about like that, right? Or we have a quota to get 45% white people. But the only time they talk about quotas is when they're in reference to the smaller elephant, and I'll get to that in just a second, right? So quota is really talking about this setback, this reserve, this special category that we have for so-called minorities. And that includes women and those other 7 categories that I talked about, and I'll share those with you at another time, right? So this idea of a quota. So what percentage? So we have a workforce that has 100%. So that's fully employed. So I have 100% people in my workforce. If I'm going to have a quota, a holdback for those special or those minority groups, what percentage might I use? 10%? Why would you say 10?
Well, because like sometimes, like they think it's unfair if you're like holding too much back, like not letting people in. But 10% is like, it's not a huge percentage of it, but it's still like they have a presence. Like.
Okay, so people have a presence, 10%. Anybody have another percentage? 50%. All right. Have you seen companies that have 50% holdback positions have you seen that? Okay, you haven't applied for much? Okay, we're gonna get you to apply it. Any other percentage? So, but seriously, is this do you think that's reasonable that employers are saying, we're gonna hold 50% of the jobs just for so-called minorities? Is there another percentage? Because we got 10, we got 50. Yes.
I would say 50% be unfair, because like quota I feel like is like more like a baseline. Like you have to hit that mark, but you can hire more if you want to.
Okay.
So maybe like lowballing it just a little bit might be a better move for
All right, so
company.
tell me, what would be the low ball? What would be a good low ball to work with?
15%.
15%. All right, cool. So we'll do 15%. All right. Yes.
I don't know, this seems like a problem because companies, they never hire like 100% of their people all at once. It's more like they look at the people they have and then they're like, we want to be like this, not like this. So then like when something, I don't know, I think people are afraid that like if there's an opening at a job and they're white, they're afraid they're not going to get picked because they're afraid that they're looking for people of color, not white people, because of those quotas.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like they're hiring, they're like keeping half of their jobs unfilled. I don't know.
No, you're absolutely right. And the fear is right, and the logic that you're trying to connect is also good logic, right? So these aren't positions that are just open and like we just started a new business and these are rolling hires, right? Rolling enrollments, rolling hires. So I'm not a math guy, so I'm going to need your help with this. right? So if we have a holdback and we're looking at 100%, if we got a holdback and we have 10% of a holdback, that means we have how many left over? 90%. All right? And this is an easy one, so that's 50%, right? Because those all lead us back to 100. And then we said this is 50%, which would give us 85%, right? So, has anyone ever applied for a job and not gotten it? Have you ever applied for a job and not received a job? Raise your hand high. All right, cool. Were you contacted and saying that you didn't get the job? Did they contact you how did you get contacted for?
They sent me an email.
They sent you an email. All right. How did you get an email too?
Yeah, I got it, yeah.
Okay, you got an email. Raise your hand if you got an email. All right, cool. Raise your hand if you got a letter. Anybody get a letter in the mail? Yeah, it's just me, my generation, right? So you get a letter in the mail. Anybody get a phone call? Okay, cool. How'd that phone call go?
Something like you're not quite qualified after like the first interview. We're looking for people who are more qualified than you are, or something like that.
Ah. Did the email say something similar to that? Did you guys go to the same company? Did you guys apply? Probably not, right? So the letdown letter is kind of like, the letter you get from a young lady that you've asked to prom that was way above your coolness level. And she said, well, your qualifications just not a right fit for our organization. And, we actually picked somebody better than you. And, and he has his own car. I mean, no, I'm sorry, right? So those letters are pretty generic, right? So how is it that people who say that the reverse discrimination is happening have the inside track? How do they know things that nobody else knows? Because what do those people say? I didn't get the job because what?
Not qualified.
That's not what people say. Because they're making this quota. So they hired somebody who's less qualified than me, and they didn't hire me. How do they know that?
No.
They don't. They don't, which is problematic. And here's why it's problematic. Because they don't know that. So then they go to this. And they say, I didn't get it because of these top numbers. Because they have this holdback, I didn't get the job. People who say that this reverse discrimination happens because they didn't get the job because of the holdback, do not tell the truth. They're not truth tellers. Why would I say that? Why am I suggesting that they are not telling the truth?
Because statistically speaking, if you're in the 90% or the 85%, you're clearly statistically favored to get that job. So just by saying that because of the 10% you didn't get it is not accurate.
It's not accurate. I'm a great basketball player. I'm fabulous. You know what my basketball name is? Priest. You know why? Because I cross foods. Right? So I'm bragging about how good I am as a basketball player, and Steph Curry hears about it. So he's visiting in town with the Timberwolves, and he comes over and says, you know what? I heard that you said you were a great basketball player, and I want to play I want to play you. So let's go on down to the RC and let's get this thing started, right? So now I'm confronted. I'm a man. I can't not be a man. So what do I say? Dude, I put a hamstring, man. No, we can't play. I just had my snow boots. I don't have the right shoes, man. Oh, man, I would love to play you and show you how good I am, but I can't. Why am I doing all that stuff?
Scared?
What am I scared of?
Indeed.
Why?
Because you said.
Because I can't play. I don't know anything about basketball. Right? So the people who say reverse discrimination, and I want you to have compassion for them. I want you to have compassion for them because some of them are our loved ones. Some of them are our parents' friends, and they'll say this stuff because they actually believe it. So have compassion on them. Don't judge them, but have compassion on them because they actually believe that this is true. When in fact, what has happened is they can't tell the truth about their own abilities, which is they couldn't cut it with the 90. So they have to blame the 10. Because the other part shatters my mind to believe that I've been getting soccer trophies and ribbons all of my life. And now that I have to compete, I don't know that I can. I hope it's clear that I love this country and I want the best for her and I want her to do wonderful and amazing things. We are the best country on the face of the planet. We're at least one of the best, right? And in history, hopefully they will say how wonderful and great we are. What kind of car do you drive?
Chevy.
What do you drive?
Prius.
Somebody said a Prius. I heard a Chevy. You drive a what? A Dodge. What do you drive? Volkswagen. I drive a Toyota. Anybody else Toyotas? Right? This goes back to the stuff, right? America used to be known, the United States used to be known for its cars, for how great its vehicles were. Legendary, things of legend, the Mustang, Corvette, right? Does anybody know when those muscle cars were, or even the Chevy SS, right? Super Sport, right? And they've remade some of the bodies. It's a Dodge. What's the Dodge now with the swoop in the back kind of thing? It's not the Avenger, it's not the Challenger, maybe it is a Challenger. The Challenger, right? Dodge Challenger, right? All these cars. The 1960s. We were knocking them out the park. People were beating down our doors trying to buy our cars in the 60s, the 50s and 60s. What's the context of the 50s and 60s that made us the automobile giants that we were in the 50s and 60s?
Is that we can make them more for like faster?
We can make them more, we can make them faster. Yes.
Post-World War.
Post-World War. What does that have to do with the greatness of America and American muscle cars? What does that have to do? What does post-World War have to do with that? We were great at making these fabulous cars. Why?
The best and the strongest.
We were the best and the strongest, but why?
We won the war. Or part of the winning.
Nobody else was making.
Nobody else was making cars. Why? Their infrastructures were absolutely destroyed. So is it fair for us to say that we were the best in the world when we weren't competing with anybody? We weren't competing with anybody. And then what happens in the 70s and 80s?
Everybody catches up.
People start catching up. We put an embargo on Hondas, right? So Honda wanted to ship cars to the United States. So Honda said, "Oh, we got you, U.S. We're gonna get in this market and we're gonna do well in the market." You know what Honda did? They loaded their car with everything you could put on the car: air conditioners, windows, sunroofs. The base model was a luxury edition. And guess what people said? I can have this, or I can have that. I'm getting a Honda. It's loaded for the same price as this American car. So then what started to happen? People started buying Hondas like crazy. It was like Apple. It was just interesting. But people just constantly buying blah, 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 blah. But now we're in a world where we have to compete. And I will suggest to you that American workers are the best workers, that we can compete with anybody on the planet. We have ingenuity. We have what it takes to compete, and we can compete with the best in the world. But when there's no competition, it's not fair to say you're the greatest when you haven't played the greatest, right? And so that's where a lot of this misnomer around this affirmative action stuff or this reverse discrimination has come in, where people haven't had to compete, and now we have to compete. We have to compete. There was a workforce, can you imagine that at one point there was a workforce that had no women in it, or that the women that were in it were entry level as opposed to executives? Got to compete. So now I have to be better. So one of the schools I'm trying to get my daughter into, they speak Mandarin Chinese. That's not the language I want my daughter to learn. Because I think Mandarin Chinese will be so common when she becomes an adult that the cutting edge languages that she needs to know come directly out of India. China is the number one, largest populated economy in the world, and guess who number 2 is? India, and they won't stay on the continent forever. So what does that look for us when we have to compete? But what did your parents tell you about life not being fair? What were they trying to tell you? Sometimes you win some, sometimes you lose some. But what does our faith also tell us about promotion? Who promotes? Look it up. Grab your phone real quick, and then we'll do a break. This will be my teaser for your break. So just look at Bible Gateway or something like that, or even Google. In the Bible, who promotes? You guys have been so attentive. I appreciate it. Your tape. Do you want your tape? What's the verse on that?
This one has 1 Peter 5.
Can you read that for me?
Yeah. I have special concern for you church leaders. I know what it's like to be a leader, and on Christ's sufferings as well as the coming glory. Here's my concern, that you care for God's flock with all the diligence of a shepherd, not because you have to, but because you want to please God. Not calculating what you can get out of it, but acting spontaneously. Not bossily telling others what to do, but tenderly showing them the way. Should I keep going?
Yeah.
When God, who is the shepherd, of all comes out in the open with his rule, he'll see that you've done it right and commend you lavishly. And you who are younger must follow your leaders. But all of you, leaders and followers alike, are to be down to earth with each other, for God has had it with the proud, but takes delight in just plain people. So be content with who you are and don't put on airs. God's strong hand is on you. He'll promote you at the right time. Live carefree before God. He is the most careful with you.
Boom. Who promotes? God promotes, right? So here is the problem with some of this stuff, is that I wonder if people actually trust and believe in God, particularly people of faith who enter into these conversations, right? Because God knows what's best for us, even when we don't. God knows what's best for us, even when we don't. And so, even in these situations, oftentimes, God is waiting. So, one thing that we know about God is that He is what? What's one of those attributes that people are embarrassed to talk about, but is true about God? He is what?
All-knowing.
He is all-knowing. So that's one of the positives. What's one of the negative attributes that people don't like talking about God? He's what? He's jealous. He's jealous. No other gods, right? I mean, that's what he said. No other gods before me. But sometimes people put more faith in the job application or in the job than they do in God. And so if you spend more time doing that, is God looking forward to blessing that if you're going to spend more time doing that than paying attention to Him? And so sometimes these things shake out like this, and we don't know why, instead of saying, well, maybe that's God's will at this time because He promotes. We blame other things. And we get back into kind of a carnal way of looking at things, right? So let's take a 10-minute break, and we'll come right back.
First year was such a good day though. It was. I feel like they were early in the time. I don't know.
Computer, not listening to them, but they're both coming from there.
He has 15 minutes. Okay, cool.
You'd send an FYI. Send the bills up.
Is that extra time? So like, I should.
How's your service package? Are you good?
Good. We could put that if we can feel like. What's waking up at night is actually like 5, like, yeah. She's like crazy.
You go. Yeah, I go to.
Did everyone get these notes? Who needed them?
All right. We're just gonna save all of it. It's so frustrating. There's just so many things to use a whole. You're like whole bar. Just stay there.
Oh, yeah. And only you.
So, as folks are coming into the class, I'm going to go right back to this chart and just address a couple other things. So, we know that that first column about affirmative actions is about impact versus intent, and that's where we get all these resources. The second column is really focused on this idea of intent versus impact. And what we know about intent versus impact is that is effective when we have or are trying to build relationships, right? Anyone ever given your parents a macaroni sculpture or made a finger painting? Where do those fine works of art go to honor the time spent making such a delightful piece of art? Where does that go? On the refrigerator, right? And if you have letter alphabets magnets, that's even better, right? It just highlights everything. When you gave that, so first of all, when your parents received it, did they go, wow, let's put this on Pinterest? Did they say, you know what, we can sell these on Etsy. Let's get you, a whole business doing. Was that their first inclination? I hope not, right? No. But how did they feel when they received that stuff from you? They were happy, right? And why were they happy? Because you made it. Because you have a relationship. And so that is where people will say it's the intent that matters, right? So when we talk about diversity in workplaces and schools, we're talking about these kinds of things. So this idea of cultural competence, right? Understanding the context where people come from is really about trying to build this relationship. Intent does matter, right? Building inclusive environments, having inclusive practices, all of those things are about, even diversity education, it's all about these personal intentions. How do we build the intentions for community together? So where the law is focused on impact versus intent, in our personal relationship, intent is everything, right? I mean, if a stranger came up and said, look, I got this new Lexus, I just want to give it to you. Although you might be excited to take it, but what's your next question? Why? Why are you giving? What is your intent, right? If they say, well, we're from Publishing Clearinghouse and you just won and here it is, and you go, yeah. But if it's something, he's like, no, I just want to do that for you, or she just wants to do that for you. You're really concerned about their intentions, right? So that's important. And then lastly, what we know about how people's behaviors change, they change through relationships with other people. My principal got mad at me once because she said something that I thought was kind of interesting. She said, we're a family here. We are a family. And, we need to take care of each other. And I raised my hand. I said, I understand what you're saying, but we're really not a family. And she was like, what do you mean? And what did I mean that we're not a family? We're literally we're not a family, but what else?
We don't have deep relationships.
We don't have deep relationships. What is our relationship based on? The fact that I work there. She fires me tomorrow. The family is broken, right? We're now a broken home, right? So sometimes people say that thing. But I will say that it is important how we treat each other. And so what I did say is that you're absolutely right. Oh, and she said that the school will take care of us. And I was like, the school is not going to take care of us. We take care of us. The school is designed to protect the school. All the policies are designed to make sure that the school keeps running. But we're responsible for our relationships while we're in the school, right? She happened to be my mentor. She knew I was kind of giving her the 1-2 on that. So then later she was like, if you do that to me in a meeting again, I was like, yes, ma'am, I got you. Yeah, and so looking at human goals, human soul, and perceived conflict. And I will continue to say that I believe that conflict is oftentimes an illusion, that it is about differing methods to very similar goals, right? So, because that helps me to be able to resolve them and think about them in a constructive way. All right, cool. So if I can get, if you can get the light for me. So this next documentary I think is interesting, mostly because I don't trust the people who made it. So, but I think I can use them because they make a couple of good points that I want that highlight what we've already talked about, right? So why might I not trust MTV? Do I have any reasons not to trust them? Yeah, what are some examples of reasons not to trust MTV? Jersey Shore. What's another one? Teen Moms, right? I mean, you have a show about that's exploitive, right? At best. But so they have a documentary called White People, and it's it's designed to have white people talk about what it means to be white and whiteness. And so I want to show just 2 clips of this. Feel free to look at it yourself, but these are the 2 clips that I think are the most meaningful for us in our context. And one is on Indian reservation in South Dakota, and the other one is actually I don't know where they are. Oh, Sioux Falls, and yeah, I think the other one's in Sioux Falls too. Anyway, at any rate, they're not far from us, right? So so we'll go ahead and watch this. Now I want to get your impressions on what you see or what you think about what they have to offer, given what we've talked about in class. My butt's gotten bigger, so.
But I would like to know what I've constantly been told my whole life, that I cannot possibly. Like you're one of the good ones.
Or it was used in a negative way. It was derogatory.
No more
I don't have
crybabies.
to deal with prejudice that someone who's Asian, someone who's black, someone who's Spanish has to deal with. That's my privilege as a white person. But it's true. If I was white, I don't think I would have to wake up knowing that there's a certain stereotype put on me. Being Asian, I'm smart, I'm good at math, I eat a dog. Do you actually wake up and that's in the front of your mind? Well, it's not in the front of my mind, but there are clear times when I know they already put me in a box.
I've never experienced systematic oppression against me.
I'll never know what that's like. I'm not saying I want to know what it's like to be discriminated against. But I would like to know what I've constantly been told my whole life that I cannot possibly ever relate to or understand.
So we're going to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, home of the Oglala Sioux tribe of Native Americans in tiny Wanli, South Dakota. Population 725 people. 14 people in this entire town in the reservation are white. I think we're gonna meet all 14 of them. This is the Crazy Horse School. It goes from kindergarten through 12th grade. I'm looking for Sam.
Hey, her kids should be coming up for lunch.
Oh, okay, great. Every single one of the 260 students here is Native American, but most of their teachers are white.
All right, guys, this is Jose. Hi. All right. I grew up in San Diego, predominantly white, where I was raised, and this is definitely a different environment to be wearing this color skin.
So what I want you to do at this point is I want you to pull out your journal. I grew up in West Fargo in North Dakota. It's a very white town.
How did your parents talk to you about race?
It just wasn't really something that was discussed like it is here.
You know, I'm wondering, all the students are natives, right? A lot of the teachers here are white. Like, how does that work out?
It can be a little weird whenever you first meet them because, like, you know, they're outsiders, and along the way, it's like they become a part of the school and they become part of, like, our family here.
What was the moment that you realized that you were, quote unquote, white?
You're in this place instantaneously.
I think like I think some of it like walking in to the store. Like you have these small conveniences, walking into the store for the first time and you're like, wait, I'm the only white person in here. I never had to I've never felt that.
I've never felt like I was treated badly because of that.
Yeah, more of just
Curiosity. What does it mean to be white in an Indian reservation?
We've never had to internalize what white people have done in America, but here, you can't escape that.
Wanli is near Wounded Knee, South Dakota, the site of one of America's darkest days. Simply put, in 1890, white soldiers slaughtered hundreds of Lakota men, women, and children as part of America's centuries-long history of atrocities against Native people.
What is this experience like for you all, being in a U.S. history classroom, being taught by a white teacher?
They always talk about the good things white people did in their history. What about the bad things when they try to get rid of us? It should be all of U.S. history.
I think for the first time to like have an uncomfortable feeling inside because of history. When so often I would tell people to like, when I was younger, I feel like as a majority you hear like you get over that, or like that was the past, that wasn't me. But then when you're like the minority within a place where recently, like there was that much oppression, you internalize that.
The theme for today is stereotypes. You're going to have 2 minutes to think of as many things that come to mind when you see the topic on the sheet of paper.
How about whites? So what do you think about when you think whites?
They're mean to us so much.
Here's the one about whites. A lot of things that I see on here are pretty negative.
All of them are negative. How does that feel when these young students see you as these things?
You know, it's something that I have to bring in here every single day. Just encountering it today, I think about, you know, one of my students who I said he couldn't go to the bathroom, and he says, you stole our land and you won't even let me go to the bathroom. You know? And while I know at the core he was joking, the skin color I wear allows me to represent something a lot bigger than myself.
I did not know about this word, wasichu. Apparently it means what again? It means
he who takes the best meat.
Greedy. To come in, be greedy, take what you want. What is a washichu?
A greedy white person.
But Anisha, you say it's just a synonym for a white person?
Yeah, that's the only way people use it, is to describe like.
I've never felt attacked by that word, but just like what it means and the fact that it exists is like, oh, rough.
I haven't felt like offended by it. I think the history is something that like, okay, I get it.
So is Sam a wasichu?
Yeah. She's the most awesomest teacher.
Yes.
I kind of don't like using the term.
Why not?
My dad raised me to not be like really racist or anything. It wouldn't feel right to me.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna go.
Where do you say thank you?
How do you say thank you in Lakota?
Living out here has just really instilled within me just a very, very real sense of just how complex things are.
What do you think are the disadvantages of being white? Now, this is a really interesting question. I know there are some people of color who are like, what is he asking? I mean, again, this is the conversation. She's in the back.
I would say there's no disadvantage to being white.
I don't know. I mean, it's like asking a rich person, like, tell me how hard your life is being rich.
This is a question many young white Americans are too embarrassed to discuss in public. But privately, it's a different story. In one study, nearly 50% of young white Americans say that today, discrimination against whites is as big a problem as discrimination against minorities.
Scholarships, definitely.
Yeah,
Scholarships,
yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of scholarships out there for people of different race.
It would ask you, like, literally on the scholarship search page, it's like, what's your race? And when I filled in that I was a white male, it said there are no scholarships available.
Hi, I'm Katie, right? Yeah. Nice to meet you. Thank you for having us. This is where you grew up?
Yeah, this is Scottsdale, Arizona.
Oh, wait, what's that?
That is my.
You're in the honor roll.
Well, I graduated as a high school scholar.
So where are you going to school right now?
I am going to Paradise Valley Community College.
How was the high school experience like for you?
I graduated top of my class in the top 10%. I graduated with 3.8 GPA.
It's a lot higher than mine. Okay, great.
Even with all that being done, I'm not able to have that education that I had hoped for.
So what was the plan?
The plan was Grand Canyon University. That's what my dream was.
So what happened when you applied?
I did get accepted.
Hey,
yeah, yeah, that was really cool.
Okay.
However, my biggest worry was the finances.
Yeah.
I just started noticing that there were all these scholarships for, for race.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, well, I don't qualify for any of those just because of the color of my skin.
How does that feel?
It kind of feels like I'm being discriminated against a little bit.
We told Katie when she was growing up, just work hard, get your grades, it'll get you far. But I think that now white folks aren't getting the same opportunities. It's kind of almost reverse discrimination in that way.
We have heard white students who say that white students are at a disadvantage when it comes to the college admission process, financial aid, scholarships, and this is unfair. Talk to me about the facts. What are the actual statistics about scholarships that are available to white students in this country?
Available to white students, virtually all of them. I think it's something like 96% are actually available to white students. In terms of who gets the scholarships, the white students are usually about 40% more likely than students of color to actually receive that type of aid.
40% more likely.
That's correct.
This surprised me. It turns out that even though 62% of undergraduate college students are white, they get 69% of private scholarships. On the other hand, minority students make up 38% of the undergraduate population, but get only 31% of private scholarships. So despite all we've heard about white students being at a disadvantage, they're actually disproportionately getting more scholarships. So what do I tell to white students?
Yes.
Well, you know, I spoke to this young white student,
yes,
who feels that she is at a disadvantage.
You're not at a disadvantage. It's just, you're simply not. Everybody in the situation, especially as it pertains to paying for college, everybody is struggling right now.
She's not gonna want to hear that. So there's a lot of white students who feel that because they're white, the scholarships may not be available to them. But if you actually looked at the facts, if you're white, you are more than 40% likely to get a scholarship than if you're not white. So I'm curious, how do you then explain this feeling that white students feel that they're at a disadvantage?
Maybe because they just expected to get all the scholarships.
Any minority group, if they get a scholarship, I feel like straight white men feel like something is being taken away from them because they don't get it. I've never had a problem finding a scholarship.
What do you say to somebody like that?
Google?
I'm Jose.
I'm Michael. Michael, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, definitely, man.
So this real feeling that Katie and many other young white Americans have, right? That I can't get the financial aid or the scholarship money that I should be able to get or I deserve to get because I happen to be white. Would you agree with that? That that's a disadvantage?
Oh yeah, because two girls that we know, one white and one's Filipino. They both applied for like the same scholarship, and the Filipino one got it, and the other one didn't. The white girl didn't.
Even though she wasn't as qualified.
I think that there might be other factors involved too. I mean, maybe she's Filipino, but that might not be why she got in. The reasons that people get scholarships are not always clear. And I think if you wanted to inquire why, you would have to ask people who gave the scholarship.
I think this is where I have to kind of give this a fact, right? Around 21 million people apply for financial aid. About 76% of all institutional merit-based scholarships go to white students. And if you're a white student, you're 40% more likely to get a scholarship than if you were a person of color. Are you surprised by the numbers?
Yes, I'm very surprised. Because the way Katie was making it sound like, oh, I'm being penalized, or they made me think like, oh, maybe like they are kind of directly aiming it towards the minorities, but with those numbers, obviously they're not.
Okay, now I'm like the victim.
Why did you say that, by the way? You said that, that you're making me out to be a victim.
I mean, I know I don't want to come off like that to you guys.
You can say whatever you want.
Yeah.
That's fine.
No, I know. I mean, it's like, you were like, you seem to be understanding, but then when the numbers came around,
when the numbers, it kind of changed my view a little bit.
I feel like you guys are attacking me now.
I know where.
Opinions are opinions.
I'm kind
I'm
of
not saying like.
put myself in both sides' shoes, I guess you could say.
Katie's feeling about this is an unfair system and now I'm at a disadvantage, that is a feeling that a lot of young white people that I talk to feel.
Most people feel like this because me, even with all the races I am, I wasn't able to get any scholarships. So it's not just you being white, it's just, it is hard to get scholarships now.
Katie, how are you reacting to what your friends just said?
Maybe it's just my side of it. Maybe it's all that I've seen, you know, being born and raised here, you know, having predominantly associated myself with generally Caucasian people. You know, my view is what it is because of my experiences, you know, and maybe I am wrong.
But here's the point that I want to make, and this is what I really want to make sure that you understand. You are not the only person who feels this way. When you hear that Christopher, you know, who's of mixed race and is a minority, has a hard time getting a scholarship, like what did you think of that?
You know, it really opened my eyes to see that there is a challenge no matter who you are or where you come from. It's hard, yeah, you know, and my initial concern was just feeling excluded from certain things, you know, just because no one likes to feel excluded, especially for the color of their skin.
So talk to me about the next steps for going to school that you want to go to.
I'm gonna keep looking for scholarships and first off apply. Hopefully I can find something or find a bunch.
How badly do you want this?
I'll do what it takes.
You're gonna do what it takes.
All right. That's all I had. Thoughts, comments? Thoughts, comments? Yes.
I just have like a question about affirmative action. So like if a place has, so they never have quotas, like if they never have a percent of people that they have to hire?
They do not have quotas. They do have goals.
Okay.
So there are goals.
Okay.
So to that end, I sent around a piece of paper that looks like this, had a bunch of charts and arrows. Everybody get that? You guys will get one? So, can you hit that mic for me? I appreciate it. Thank you. So I was the affirmative action officer for Metro County, and so quotas are illegal, but we did have goals, right? So on this page, there's the job group category. Do you see that? So there's administrators, professionals, technicians, protective service workers, paraprofessionals, administrative support, skill craft, service maintenance. And, oh, I erased the percentages. I'm sorry. Well, let's just go back and do this. We'll use this as an example. Right, so our workforce is at 100%. And at this time at Anoka County, what was the total employees, what was the total number of employees in the workforce?
1,000.
Yep, 1,790, which would put us at, if we were looking at holdback positions of 10%, would put us at what? What's 10% of 1,790? 100 and what? Yep, 117 or 118, right? So the utilization number is the number of people who are currently in a position, right? So this idea of utilization are the number of people who are currently in the position out of the pool. The availability is the number based on the census in the general area. So because Anoka sits at the top of what two counties? What are the other two counties that Anoka sits on top of? I hear it. Ramsey County and Hennepin County, right? So those are the two big places. And what are their population centers? Where do they have most of their population in both of those counties? So Ramsey County and Hennepin County, what are the two big population centers in those counties? Minneapolis and St. Paul. So when looking at the census says that between Minneapolis and St. Paul, given Anoka's closeness to Minneapolis and St. Paul, that we actually could pull people from that geographic area as employees in the county, right? So according to census data. And so that's where we get those numbers of census data. Unutilized numbers means that these are the numbers of people that we could hire from the pool, but have not hired, right? So utilized means that we've utilized these people from the pool. The unutilized means that these are possible candidates that we haven't used. So as you look at women, so the possible number that we could use is 10. The number that's unutilized is 7, which means that how many people did they use from the pool? 3, right? So that means that the percentage that's available to achieve this goal is at 45%, right? And I'm going through this just so you have a better understanding. And I know it sounds confusing, but by the time we get done with it, it should make a whole lot more sense, right? So when we go over to the category of minorities, again, the same thing applies. So for administrators in our census area, the available number is 0, but we could possibly, we've hired 0, but there are possibly 2 that are available to us, if that makes sense. Do you see that now? So utilization means that we've hired them, availability, and then the utilization numbers mean what's left over, right? So when you look at these annual goals, what percentages do you see? On average, if we average all those up, they range about what percentage? You can just take an eye shot. Right around 10%, right? Give or take 5%. Now, this particular number, this minority group that we're looking at, is divided into 5 different categories. So if we were to have these so-called quotas for each of those categories, each of the categories would have to split the 10%. And so if I have 7 categories and I'm dividing this 10% between each category, what am I looking at as an average for each of those so-called racial quotas or holdbacks for those categories? I'm looking at what? Less than what? Yeah, less than 1.2 or less than 1%. So when people say that this reverse discrimination is happening and that this affirmative action is keeping them from doing that, they're actually talking about numbers around 1.2, that they can't compete against these 1.2s. And as you explained earlier, these are rolling enrollments. So this doesn't mean that this isn't all at once. So that means that folks, there is some delusion about affirmative action that people have versus what the truth is about affirmative action. And I want to point out something that I thought was interesting. in the video, because the young lady said that she had a 3.8 GPA. Is that a good GPA? Oh, yes, that is a good GPA. Is it a competitive GPA? What's competitive? If a 3.0 is going up head to head against a 4.0, how's a 3.0 going to show up? They're not. They're not. So if you have a 4.0 and you are applying for a scholarship, do you think that what's the likelihood that people with a higher GPA may have applied for a scholarship that she applied for?
Very likely.
Very likely. So what is her problem? Not necessarily her problem, but what is her challenge? It's not other people's GPAs. It's her GPA, right? She actually thinks that a 3.8 is competitive compared to a 4.0. And I don't know what her school system was like, but I've never heard of a school scholar. Anyone heard of that kind of program? No. I want to be forthcoming and forthright with you about my own K-12 education. I learned this by my sophomore year in high school. I figured it out. That if I wanted to be on par with the private school, so there was a school called Chaminade Julienne. It was a Chaminade and it was Julienne, and then they blended together. It was a co-ed Catholic school, uniforms, the whole nine. Just blowing the doors in sports and all sorts of stuff. Blowing the doors off of people. There was another high school named called Bishop Alter High School, which is in I think it's in Oakwood, a suburb of Dayton, Ohio, affluent, great stuff. And I had friends that went there. And I would listen to the stories about their class. I'd look at their classwork, and I was like, I want to be like these people. I want to be like these people. I want to study what they're studying, right? Because back at my home school, in regular classes, I wasn't getting what they were getting in their regular classes. And it clicked for me that if I wanted to be on par with my private school friends, I had to be in honors classes and AP classes just to be on the same level as they were in their private school. I was able to figure that out. There were other people who never figured it out. I figured out that I needed one-on-one instruction, and guess what? I found I could have one-on-one instruction in my AP classes and in my honors classes. Why? There's not many of us in the class. Not many of us in the class. And so even talking about the high schools that we go to, we know that they're weighted, right? We know that certain schools have certain schools have reputations for scholarship and others don't. Others have reputations for athletics and others don't, right? So her problem, and I would say that many people who cry of reverse discrimination, the major challenge is actually in telling the truth, that maybe that opportunity wasn't for them, or that maybe that they aren't as good as they would like to think that they are because they have the illusion of knowledge, right? And so one of the things that we don't want to trap ourselves in is falling into these same or similar traps. Right? So hopefully you can see an example of an affirmative action plan, a set of goals, and here's the interesting thing about this. Even given these meager goals, looking at this 1.2%, and in some cases it was a part-time position that would actually make us reach our affirmative action goals. or one individual's job that would, if we hired that one individual, would change the landscape of our affirmative action plan. We oftentimes didn't make that. And we could explain why that was. And it's a phrase that sometimes can be a scapegoat or an excuse button called we did our best effort. That's how you explain not reaching your goals, right? So we did our best effort to another example of how and why this kind of affirmative action stuff is important to kind of talk about is this example. And I don't know, did I share this example about the license center when I worked at? Okay, so we were hiring for out in Lane, we were hiring a license center front desk person, right? So you go into the license center, it's the person, the teller that's right there taking your information and whatnot. And we had a woman there who was, this was a full-time job, and we were taking applications and whatnot. And so this one woman applied, she was a white woman, had been at the county 2 years as a temp employee. So she knows the system in and out. And as a matter of fact, she got an extra couple of points for being an incumbent, right? Or a possible incumbent working at the county. And then there was a woman who came from Ramsey County, had a similar position, but the way Ramsey County does things is different than the way Anoka County does it, which is also different than how Hennepin County does it, right? So, it was a similar job, but not exactly the same job. And she was Hmong. She was Hmong. And while in Ramsey County, she was also a Hmong interpreter in her position. So they come to, they both apply for the position, and the hiring managers have questions about what they should do. So they come to me and they say, you know, Andre, what should we do? We have these two candidates, blah, 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 blah. And so I simply asked this question. Which of these candidates keeps us operating effectively, efficiently, at the same level of excellence that we come to expect, or that our community comes to expect from being at the license center? Which of these candidates does that? And which of these candidates expands our capacity to serve in new and different ways? Which one? So I left the question up to them. I gave them those two questions, and the decision was ultimately theirs because I'm not the hiring manager, they are. What decision do you think they made? Who did they hire? Who do you think they hired? You got a 50-50 shot. They hired the Hmong woman. Why? One might go to this affirmative action thing. It was affirmative action. Anybody live in Blaine? Champlin's close to Blaine, right? Anybody know about the demographics in that area? What's true about the demographics in that area?
Well, there's a lot of Hmong people there, so she can communicate with a larger population of people that come in.
Yeah. So they hired the Hmong woman because in that particular license center, there are lots of Hmong people who come there. And this is the interesting thing that other people also want to talk about. They want to use this idea of as qualified. So is the Hmong woman that was hired less qualified or as qualified as the white woman who had been there for 2 years? I would suggest that the use of that language is poorly phrased. She has what? More? Different qualifications, right? Different qualifications. And so is she as qualified or has as much qualification? No, she has different qualifications. Why? Because the environment demands different qualifications. And so we can't let people do that. And the reason I said we can't let other people do that, because those things will creep into our head and out of our mouth and into our heart. And then it'll be hard to work with our students when we're resentful for things that we think they may or may not have, or advantages that they may or may not have. Right? So those are some important things to kind of think about. So there's that. Let me check the time. Yeah, any conversation, any additional conversation, any thoughts? Does this make sense? Am I babbling too much in crazy talk is okay. Cool. So you will have so I'll make adjustments to that to the quiz so people can who need to augment that can do that. For those of you who have seen the film already, what did you think about it?
It's definitely frustrating at parts to hear things that come out of their mouth, but also very, I think it gives evidence to the fact that the nation's so different. Places that people don't, like, there's one quote where it said, from the man, oh, in Shelbyville, the issue of race and I don't know, something else doesn't exist anymore. But based on what he just said and based on pastors and other people, that's not there. So I just thought that was interesting.
Did anybody, for those of you who watched the film, something I thought was interesting was when the guy was working on his truck. Did anyone notice anything interesting in that conversation? Or things that are noteworthy in that conversation?
He said people were taking his job.
Yeah, he said people are taking our jobs. And what did they highlight as the jobs that people were taking? They were not nice jobs, but what specifically did, I think the woman in the yard addressed the types of jobs they were known for.
Jobs that nobody wanted to do.
Jobs that nobody wanted to do. They said, we used to be known as the pencil capital of the world. When was the last time you bought a pencil? Will they ever be known as the pencil capital of the world again? No. No matter what politician can promise them, we're going to bring your jobs back. Pencil jobs are not coming back. Right? It's not happening. It's not happening. And so it's interesting how people get duped into some of this logic stuff that they know is not logical. But it's easier to blame someone than it is to actually own up to the fact that maybe I got a raw deal. I was sold something that is not true or won't be delivered on. All right. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you so much for a great day.
Later on the website, and we're gonna go through your church, right? I thought you would have right away.
Okay.
So when does I still looked at but did I see what I did? But then,
Yeah, but really?
if it's totally different from what you wanted, then I'll be happy.
All right.
That's what you're doing.
Yeah, I'll look at it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, thank you. And okay, did you need a copy of the big poster at your table? No. You need a big one. Okay, cool. I'll have one for you tomorrow. Sounds good. Did this make sense today?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just thought, like, I've been confused with how it works, 'cause, okay, so I work at a summer camp in the summer.
Yeah.
And it just generally always, like, we want to have like a diverse staff, but like, there's literally only usually like one person who's not white on the staff.
Yeah.
And it's not, like, we want more people to apply that are like of different color, but it's not, it's just because of like, that's who applies. And it's like, it's hard, like, it makes it, to me, that looks like, oh, we only hire white people, when it's like.
So here's an example of what, I should have probably given this in terms of this inclusion. So for my daughter to go to the private school we're trying to get her to, it's an 18-month cycle before she starts school. So we would have had to start, so we started almost a year and a half, almost 2 years before she starts school. This is preschool, right? That's a bureaucracy problem. In that, how many people know? How many people are thinking like that? So we just stumbled on it, like we just kind of fell into it, right? So sometimes the results are systemic in ways that we don't think about. Right? So another example, at Anoka County, we would hire for summer jobs. Do you know when we hire for summer jobs? In December of the year before. So by the time kids, the logic would suggest is summer, I'll go apply for the job. But guess what? All the jobs are already taken, right? So you try to get there by March or even May. There's no jobs because we fill those jobs back in December or January, right? And so, so sometimes there are those kinds of procedural things that come out of bureaucracies that benefit the county, that benefit the camp, but may not necessarily benefit the people who they're trying to benefit, right? So, which camp is that?
It's called Luther Trust. It's like it's a small Luther Trust. Alexandria.
Oh, sweet.
So,
I'm sure I passed it.
maybe, yeah. It's on Lake Carlos.
Okay, I've just gone to Alexandria for the technical school.
Right.
There, so.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay, one more question. So like, say a company has like an 85% or like a, say 15% like goal to get like minorities hired. So would it, like, say they hire 85% of like people who are not minorities, and then they're like, okay, we don't like, and nobody of minorities hired, and they have like this open spot left. So like, would they sometimes hire a minority if they're not as qualified as another white person who applies because they're a minority? Like, does that never happen?
I would say that it probably does happen in places that don't want to be successful.
Okay.
Right? For anyone to hire someone who's not capable of a job is baffling. Okay? So does it happen? I'm sure it does. Is it in the best interest of the company? I'd say probably not.
But usually the problem, usually that isn't the problem. It's just that like usually there are minorities that are applying and it's not.
Yeah, or sometimes, so it depends on what level in the organization. In the organization will say, look, in terms of management or leadership, we need a woman in this position. So until we get the right woman, we're gonna keep this open and keep having people apply and interviewing folks until we get the right person. Very rarely do you hear that they won't fill it because they're waiting for someone, but they will continue, keep it open until they find the right kind of person that they want.
Okay.
And typically, so sometimes you'll hear like with the civil service tests that the tests get augmented or in some cases thrown out because they are racially biased. And then that's where stuff gets really, people really get upset because civil service tests are supposed to be fact-based.
Yeah.
But sometimes they can be culturally biased given whoever the testers are or what the tests or whatever. And so that's what, there have been lots of claims around reverse discrimination around that, which may or may not have merit. I don't think it has a whole lot of merit, but I'm also not the Supreme Court, so they will decide that kind of stuff, but.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Thank you.
All right.